Hey guys, tonight we sink our calloused feet into the steamy, smoke-filled world of a palace kitchen. Welcome to the Tang Dynasty. You are not a noble, not a poet, not even one of those smug concubines lounging on embroidered silk. No, you are a cook. Specifically, a low-level palace cook. Your enemy's boiling broth, burned fingers, and a head chef with more rage than chili oil. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are 47 other cooks fighting for your job. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and local time down in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up when the roosters do. Correction, you wake up before the roosters. Because some steward slammed a bell against the kitchen wall while shouting, "The ginger must boil whatever time it is. It's dark and cold." And your back is covered in last night's charcoal soot, because you share a sleeping platform with 3 other assistants and 1 large bag of dried scallions. Your bed, a fraying bamboo mat stuffed with more holes than comfort. The pillow is technically a brick, and your blanket is a faded cotton sheet you stole from laundry duty last mid-autumn festival. You wrap it around your shoulders like it's silk and pretend the smell of sesame oil in your hair is perfume, not grease from the duck fryer. Someone nearby is already sharpening a cleaver. You hear the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. It's soothing, in a gladiatorial sort of way. You stagger up, your joints making sounds that would frighten a Tang court musician. You're in your early 20s, which is about 47 in kitchen years. Your knees are auditioning for retirement. You slip on your uniform stiff hemp pants, a stained tunic, and a cap that's more ceremonial than functional. It's supposed to keep hair out of food. In reality, it holds in heat like a portable steamer. The dorm stinks of smoke, garlic, sweat, and steamed cabbage. The air is thick, heavy with condensation. Someone forgot to douse the fire pit, so there's a new hole in the back wall again. Not your problem? Probably. You shuffle outside, squinting against the oil lamp haze. The palace looms just a stone's throw away, ornate, serene, golden. You, however, live in the shadow of the palace. Literally. Your kitchen is in the servants' wing, wedged between the laundry hall and a storage room filled with dried jellyfish. Still, the Tang court loves food. Maybe too much. There's an entire ministry for seasonal ingredients. Your job, keep the emperor's stomach full and his digestion divine. Historians still argue whether Tang Dynasty palace kitchens were the birthplace of high cuisine or a bureaucratic version of Hell's Kitchen. But in this moment, as your stomach grumbles and your feet slap against the wet stone tiles, you know one thing for sure: you have 40 minutes to prep 200 dumplings. And not a single one is allowed to be ugly. You rush toward the outer kitchen compound, technically still part of the palace, but spiritually closer to purgatory. The floor is wet from yesterday's dishwater spill, and as you slip a little, you thank your calluses for acting as natural grip soles. Your workstation is a wooden slab that leans to the left and smells perpetually of boiled pig ear. You wipe it with a cloth that started its life white and is now some shade between gravy dusk and fermented disappointment. First task fire. The brick oven must be coaxed back to life, which means you squat in front of it, puffing into a pile of damp tinder while smoke punches you directly in the eyes like it owes you money. A fellow cook nearby waves his hand through the soot and grins. You hate him, mostly because he woke up with energy. The kitchen hierarchy is vicious. You, being a junior cook, rank somewhere between the ash bucket and the rat that occasionally steals from it. You aren't allowed to season anything without permission. Salt is treated like silver, and soy sauce. That's holy water. Your first assigned task is to prepare lotus root soup. This would be fine if the lotus roots weren't still frozen from last night and resemble medieval weaponry. You slam them on the chopping block with theatrical vengeance, trying not to scream as you realize your knife is dull again. You'll need to sneak it to the sharpening room, where the black-toothed whetstone man trades edgework for gossip, or dried mushrooms, if he's cranky. The steam room is a jungle. 2 massive vats hiss with pork broth. while 6 assistants dart between them like terrified ants. One of them is weeping quietly, holding a scalded forearm. The chef barely notices. He's busy screaming at a senior apprentice who dared to over-garnish the imperial congee. Historians still argue whether Tang court food was overly ornamental or deceptively simple. What's certain is that no one here is allowed to breathe wrong near a sesame seed. You are handed a chicken. It's still twitching. Apparently, you're in charge of dispatching it. You mutter a quiet apology to the bird and do what must be done. A drop of blood splashes on your wrist and you don't even flinch. That's kitchen life violence before sunrise. Silence during scolding, tears when no one's watching. The head chef makes his entrance. Dramatically, of course, like he's auditioning to be emperor. He paces the row of prep tables, hands behind his back, ready to unleash destruction over a single wilted scallion. You brace yourself. He stops, sniffs, points at your station. You forgot to fan the stove. He bellows. You nod submissively. It's a performance you've mastered. Historians still argue whether imperial cooks were artists or prisoners. But when the chef walks away muttering idiot, you know you've survived another morning. For now, your reward for surviving the chaos of breakfast prep is latrine duty. Yes, because culinary prestige in the Tang Palace also includes knowing how to clean human waste with elegance and speed. The outhouse squats behind the outer kitchens, pretending to be modest with its slanted roof and rickety wooden walls. But it is, in fact, a spiritual trial. You step inside, and the smell hits you like a chariot to the face. It's the scent of 10,000 regrets, mingled with last week's bad tofu. Toilets in the Tang Dynasty are a social experiment and often a small public event. Palace staff of lower ranks share the facilities, meaning privacy is a forgotten concept. You nod at the scullery boy squatting in the corner, who nods back like this is just another Tuesday. Your job is to empty the buckets. These are ceramic pots, once beautifully glazed but now permanently dyed by nature's palette. You grip one and carefully, so carefully, carry it to the compost pit. A single stumble means a life of shame and possibly new employment as a tanner, because after that, only the leather workers would take you. Historians still argue whether the Tang elite had separate toilets with running water or simply better-smelling buckets. You, however, have no doubt the emperor might have had flowing porcelain. You have a tilted hole and the judgmental stare of a nearby goose. Oh yes, the palace keeps geese as guards. They're loud, aggressive, and deeply invested in your bathroom breaks. As you return to your post, you realize there's no such thing as toilet paper. Not really. You have a basket of options: bamboo spatulas, rags, and rough-cut paper made from tree bark. None of them are soft. Some of them are sentient. You pick the least offensive one and get on with your life. A fellow cook once claimed he found a silk scrap in the basket, a gift from the gods. He whispered, "More likely, it was an accident involving laundry and too much wine." You leave the latrine, soul slightly damaged, only to hear the unmistakable shout, "The inspector is coming." Ah yes, the kitchen inspector. The man who believes a fallen sesame seed is grounds for execution and has an uncanny ability to appear whenever someone scratches their nose near a dumpling. You sprint back to your station, check your apron for mystery stains, and pray the goose doesn't follow. Remember earlier when you thought kitchen work was bad? Add this: no plumbing, judgmental poultry, and cleaning buckets full of imperial digestion. You dream of one day earning the right to use the indoor latrines, lavish, polished, possibly scented with jasmine petals. But you know the truth. Those are reserved for nobles, ministers, and the emperor's favorite eunuchs. And you just refilled the firewood next to the stink pit. Still, there's a strange pride in surviving this. Every Tang Palace worker must pass through these indignities like stepping stones to oblivion, or to promotion. Maybe. Historians still argue whether anyone really moved up the ranks from latrine duty. But you wash your hands in cold, soapy rice water and carry on. It's lunchtime. Lunchtime, in theory, is when the cook eats. In the Tang Dynasty palace, it's when you prepare other people's lunch and try not to faint from hunger while surrounded by dishes that smell like dreams you'll never afford. Today's imperial menu includes stewed duck with lotus root, stir-fried river eel, mung bean jelly with garlic vinegar, and pear slices soaked in fermented plum wine. Sounds delicious, right? The problem is you don't get to taste any of it, not even a lick. If you're caught. It's goodbye kneecaps, hello prison card. Instead, your meal is a tepid bowl of millet porridge and some pickled mustard greens that have been pickling since before you were born. And no, there's no meat. You smell meat. You cut meat. You cradle it like a child while slicing it perfectly for the emperor. But you do not consume meat. Meat is for favorites and ghosts. You huddle with the other lower cooks near the back wall and slurp your porridge while pretending not to inhale the scent of braised pork drifting from the next room. Cold irony, you're cooking history's most decadent meals, while your own lunch would make a prisoner in Pompeii weep. A scholar once wrote that a Tang chef is closer to the divine than the general. Historians still argue whether that was satire. You lean toward definitely. You don't get a break after eating. Of course, no siesta, no post-meal scroll reading. You rinse your bowl in lukewarm ash water and are immediately summoned to prepare dumplings for the concubines' chamber. 40 dumplings, all uniform, all filled with minced shrimp. Leeks and powdered cinnamon, yes. Cinnamon, the spice worth its weight in silver. A side note, you've never tasted cinnamon. You only know it from smell. And from the lecture you got last week, when one speck of it went into the wrong dumpling and apparently caused Lady Wei to experience unbalanced qi. You roll dough with a stick that looks suspiciously like a repurposed broom handle. The fillings rationed with military precision. If one dumpling weighs more than the others, the senior taster will notice. He always notices. He once claimed he could detect imbalance with his soul. You're not convinced he has one. By the end, your wrists ache, your shoulders burn, and your back sounds like it's trying to play a zither. But the dumplings look perfect at least until the serving eunuch drops the tray, and all 40 go bouncing across the floor like tragic rice balls. No one breathes. You especially don't. Because guess who has to redo them? So you do. You roll. You fold. You stuff. And this time, you chant softly under your breath. A blend of desperation, culinary prayer, and threats directed at gravity, qi. You deliver the second batch with trembling hands and a bow so deep you nearly headbutt the floor. You wait for approval. A single nod, you don't get one. But at least no one screams. Back in the prep room, someone offers you a boiled egg from their sleeve. You weep internally. You haven't seen an egg since the spring festival. But before you can take a bite, the bell rings again. Dinner prep starts now, because lunch is just Act 1. You're peeling ginger under a flickering oil lamp, and the room smells like fire, sweat, and mild despair. It's time to change clothes. Except you don't actually have clothes to change into. Welcome to the imperial wardrobe of a palace cook. Your outfit is an apron-stained, sweat-stiffened, sesame oil-scented robe that's technically brown linen, but now exists in a color range best described as gravy gradient. It was beige when you got it 5 years ago. You're not sure anymore. The fabric rubs like sandpaper and breathes like a brick wall. During the summer, it traps heat like a dumpling steamer. In winter, it flaps pointlessly in the wind like a particularly pessimistic flag. You wear this outfit every day. You wash it. Of course, by which we mean, once a month you hammer it against a rock beside the servant's trough and pray the mold doesn't fight back. Soap, that's for the concubines and monks. You use ash. Sometimes rice water. Sometimes just rain. Footwear technically, yes. You own a pair of rope sandals. They are mostly whole. The rope is fraying. The soles flap like gossip. And a pebble family has moved in permanently. You've tried to fix them with boiled rice glue. They now stick to your foot in ways that can only be described as philosophical. Let's not forget the accessories lice. They're your most consistent companions. They don't complain, they don't judge, and they reproduce like your problems constantly. You pick them off your arms between stewing and plating. Historians still argue whether palace workers were issued any kind of uniform beyond one rag fits all. Some claim there was a ceremonial apron for festivals. You've never seen one. But you once dreamed of its silk, golden thread, something that didn't smell like boiled cabbage. Your sleeves are too long. Your belt is a piece of twine you stole from a dumpling parcel. And if you dare tuck in the hem for mobility, A supervisor might accuse you of trying to impersonate a higher rank. There is no winning, only sweating. In winter, you layer, by which we mean you stuff straw into the inner folds of your robe. By lunchtime, the straw is soaked. By nightfall, it's frozen. Congratulations. You're a walking compost heap. You tried patching the holes once, but needle and thread require permissions. And you don't have permissions. You have responsibility. There's a difference. The ironic bit, you're surrounded by silks. Literally. The nobles gliding through the palace wear robes that shimmer like water and whisper when they walk. Even their sleeves look better fed than you. But you are a dumpling technician wrapped in a burlap frown. One fringe fact you secretly enjoy: high-ranking eunuchs often carry sachets of perfumed herbs around their waists, not because they like flowers, but because the smell of the palace staff is so offensive it can cause nausea. You've witnessed this firsthand. You once made a prince gag by simply walking past him on laundry day, which, again, occurs monthly. Your back itches, your chest itches, your sense of dignity itches, and yet, as you adjust your grimy apron and return to slicing lotus root with the focus of a surgeon, you remind yourself one threadbare robe is still more than most peasants outside these walls get. Comforting, not really. But at least the lice seem happy. You are gnawing on a chicken bone, not for flavor, but to distract from the pulsating ache in your gums. Welcome to dental hygiene, Tang Dynasty edition, a fascinating blend of superstition, guesswork, and early retirement for your teeth. You begin your day with mouthfeel best described as fermented duck pit. There's no toothpaste, no toothbrush, no breath mints, just warm rice water if you're lucky, maybe a twig, chewed into a brushy end, if you want to feel fancy. It doesn't help, it just adds splinters to your regret. One mainstream historical fact: ancient Chinese texts did recommend using willow twigs or saltwater rinses to cleanse the mouth. Unfortunately, nobody told your supervisor, and nobody is handing out dental care kits in the kitchen barracks. You once saw a steward using a bamboo skewer to pick something out of his molar. He later fainted from a gum infection. You never asked what happened next. Your gums are red, puffy, and bleed when you eat steamed turnip. But who has time to worry about bleeding when the Empress wants her carp dumplings pleated with poetic symmetry every now and then? You catch a whiff of your own breath and understand why your neighbor turned away mid-conversation. There's an odor that can't be hidden by garlic and ginger. You've tried. It's somewhere between decaying manuscript and boiled pond. Historians still argue whether the Tang elite had access to some sort of herbal mouth rinse or medicinal chewing tablets. Some say high-ranking nobles chewed cloves. You wouldn't know. All your cloves end up in the soup. And then there's the tooth pain. Sharp, stabbing, spontaneous, like a hot needle in the jaw. You try to ignore it. Chew on the other side. Until snap. A molar cracks. You freeze. You contemplate your options. Option 1, do nothing. Except that you now live in a world of soft foods and quiet sobbing. Option 2, go to the palace healer. You've heard rumors. The healer keeps a set of bronze tongs. He believes bad spirits hide inside teeth, and the only way to free them is by removing the entire tooth without warning. An apprentice once described it as a spiritual exorcism, performed with garden tools. You choose option 1. Now your meals are carefully selected from the mushier end of the spectrum. Rice porridge, bean curd, egg custard when you're lucky. No more candied lotus or fried mantou. Those are for the strong-jawed. Every cold draft sends a lightning bolt down your neck. You flinch when you laugh too hard. You fear smiling. The palace girls already whisper that you look like a frightened squirrel. And if, heaven forbid, you catch a fever, well, that tooth might swell. Your face could balloon on one side. The healer will come anyway, with a prayer scroll and a spoon. One fringe tidbit: some Tang Dynasty remedies for toothache involved applying crushed garlic and scallion juice to the aching area. You tried that once. It made the pain worse and also cleared the entire kitchen for 20 minutes. But hey, bad teeth, bad breath, and an irrational fear of tongs. At least you're still upright, still cooking, still semi-functional in the imperial soup hierarchy. Just remember, you're not dying. You're flavoring the broth with internal suffering. You roll out of your sleeping mat before dawn. Not because you're eager to start the day, but because your supervisor believes that a palace cook should fear both lateness and reincarnation as a dung beetle. By the time you've rubbed the sleep crust from your eyes, your body already aches in ways that defy biology. Your back is tight. Your feet are sore. Your shoulders feel like you've been carrying the emperor himself up Mount Tai. Welcome to hard labor in the Tang Dynasty, where the only things more abundant than tea are your blisters. A mainstream historical fact, the Tang Palace kitchens employed dozens, sometimes hundreds of workers responsible for prepping elaborate banquets, meals for ministers, and ritual offerings. The workload is divided in theory. In practice, hierarchy means the lowest-ranked workers do the chopping, scrubbing, hauling, fetching, lifting, and apologizing. You are the lowest-ranked worker, so naturally, you do everything except wear the crown. The cauldrons are massive. They could drown a small yak, and yet you must carry them from the wood fire pit to the main stove like you're auditioning for a supernatural strength competition. There is no time to rest. There is only not moving fast enough. You learn to dice vegetables so quickly that you hear phantom chopping sounds in your dreams. Your fingers permanently smell like leeks. You have scar tissue in places you've never seen. And if you're thinking this is just an intense cooking shift, you're wrong. At least in modern kitchens, you don't have to collect your own firewood. In the Tang Palace, you do. Or scrub soot off giant woks with rice chaff. Or haul water from the courtyard cistern because the pipe system mysteriously doesn't reach your wing. Historians still argue whether Tang Palace workers were rotated in shifts or worked in brutal continuity. Judging by the hollowness in your knees and the clockless blackness outside, you're betting on the second one. You do all this in silence, not because it's sacred or calming, but because the head steward believes noise carries bad chai into the emperor's breakfast. You once sneezed during a pickling session and were reassigned to radish rinsing for 2 weeks. And that's just daytime. Sometimes, there are night banquets, moon festivals, surprise visits from foreign emissaries. You learn to function on naps. Micro naps, standing naps. Once, you slept with your eyes open and woke up seasoning an already finished dish. No one noticed. A fringe tidbit palace kitchen workers were sometimes gifted to the court from other noble houses, which sounds generous until you realize that being a culinary gift is only slightly more prestigious than being a particularly charming donkey. You haven't seen the outside world in weeks. You hear rumors about poetry readings, garden walks, and celestial orchestras. But you are an onion ghost, a garlic gremlin, a creature of grease and soot. Still, somehow, you keep going, because if you fail, there are punishments. If you succeed, there is less shouting, and one day, maybe, a promotion to soup assistant, or maybe not. But at least you now know how to lift a pot the size of destiny using just your thighs. You'd think working in the kitchen, surrounded by fire and boiling broth, would mean you're immune to weather. You'd be wrong. In the Tang Dynasty, the weather doesn't visit. It lives with you. Winter is a house guest that refuses to leave, wrapping icy fingers around your ankles as you slog through pre-dawn frost to the open-air storeroom. Your breath puffs like steam from a tea kettle. Your fingers, they turn stiff, reddish-white, and about as dexterous as pickled bamboo shoots. You try wrapping them in cloth, your version of gloves, but the grease soaks through. And you end up with frozen oil mittens. Delicious, inside the kitchen. The cold doesn't exactly go away. Stone walls don't hold heat. Fires burn under pots. But you don't get to sit by them. You dance around heat like it's forbidden love too close, and you're scorched. Too far and you're an icicle. Come summer, everything flips. The air turns thick, soupy, and cruel. You don't sweat, you leak. From your neck, from your scalp, from places sweat should have no business appearing. Your robe sticks to your skin like steamed dumpling wrap. The courtyard bricks radiate heat, and you start to suspect they may actually be baking you alive. Slowly, methodically, like a well-trained Tang pâtissier. Remember that onion ghost from earlier? Now you smell like if garlic had heat stroke. A mainstream historical fact, Chang'an, the capital city, endured bitter winters and punishing summers. And despite the city's advanced design, including aqueducts and ventilation tunnels, palace servants and lower-class workers often had no protection from the elements. The wealthy elite have silk robes and shaded walkways. You have a linen tunic that's about as breathable as a steamed bun. And when the monsoons come, the palace leaks in dramatics, operatic ways. Buckets dot the kitchen like a water collection festival. Rainwater drips into your rice flour. No one blinks. The emperor still expects lunch. Historians still argue whether palace cooks were allowed midday breaks to avoid heat stroke. Based on your current level of exhaustion and the way your hair is plastered to your skull. You're guessing? Probably not. A fringe detail. Some Tang-era kitchens reportedly experimented with ice storage pits for royal use. Emphasis on royal. You don't get ice. You get to haul it to other people's pavilions sweating, cursing, and daydreaming about reincarnating as a camel in Mongolia. The worst part of seasonal change isn't even the physical misery. It's the sheer unpredictability. One week you're layering up with 3 crusty tunics. The next, you're begging the wind to come back, even if it brings sand from the western deserts. You start to understand why Tang poets always mention the seasons they're not being romantic. They're just deeply traumatized. Some nights in winter, you huddle in the storage room under a pile of rice sacks. In summer, you try sleeping next to a cracked window until the mosquitoes arrive like a Tang Dynasty boy band, too many, too loud, and somehow universally popular. The weather doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't care if the emperor wants cold duck today. It just is present, intrusive, and eternal. Like your supervisor, or that one beetle that always crawls into the vinegar vat. You used to think of seasons as something you celebrated. Now you measure them by what parts of your body hurt the most. Water should be your friend. It's the source of life, the cleanser of filth, the thing poets write gentle metaphors about. But here, in the Tang Dynasty palace kitchens, water is just as likely to kill you as it is to help you. It starts innocently enough. You're told to fetch water from the central well or nearby cistern. The palace boasts a decent supply thanks to impressive hydraulic engineering, but access depends on rank. And as the lowest on the culinary food chain, your bucket privileges are just barely above drink from the gutter. Sometimes the water smells off. Sometimes it has things swimming in it, things with legs, antennae, or the confidence of a drunk centipede. But you use it anyway. For soups, for rice, for cleaning vegetables, and, regrettably, for drinking. A mainstream historical fact, although Tang cities had drainage systems and public bathhouses, safe drinking water was far from guaranteed. Waterborne diseases like dysentery were common, and mortality from contaminated sources was high, especially among servants and laborers. Bathing is supposed to help. Right cleanse your chai. Wash away bad energy. Start fresh. That would be cute if you were allowed to bathe regularly. Here's how bathing works in your world, once every 10 days if you're lucky. In tepid water recycled from 5 other poor souls who also smell like roasted leeks. You scrub yourself with old rice husks, because soap isn't really a thing yet. Then you towel off with a cloth so stiff it might legally count as armor. You'd think a bath would be refreshing, but no, you feel exposed, vulnerable. Because, as one helpful elder reminds you, open pores attract evil spirits. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from actual illness patterns or just a general hatred of comfort. Either way, it works. You now fear bath time more than food poisoning. Speaking of which, your stomach gurgles at random intervals, like a sad, haunted flute. You try to ignore it. Maybe it was the river crab you didn't cook all the way. Maybe it was the raw cucumber snack you borrowed from the noble's cart. Or maybe it's just your digestive system slowly waving a white flag. A fringe tidbit: some Tang physicians believed boiling turtle shells into broth could purify your blood. You've tasted turtle broth. It tastes like hot regret. It also didn't fix the strange rash you developed on your elbows last week. You dream of modern plumbing, faucets, filters, even just having water pressure strong enough to rinse the stickiness off your hands. But here, you carry water on your back. You ration it like treasure, and you pray, every time you drink, that it won't be the last thing you ever taste. Still, you wake up and do it all again. Because without water, there's no broth. And without broth, there's no dinner. And without dinner, someone in embroidered silk might get angry and your head might end up in next week's stew. So drink slowly, wash sparingly, trust nothing that sloshes. Now, we journey back to the glowing canals and echoing temples of Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, where a feathered serpent watches your every move and taxes come not just in coin, but in cacao beans, jaguar pelts, and occasionally terrified humans. You're not a priest, nor a warrior. You are something even more feared, a tribute collector. Yes, a glorified traveling accountant with an eagle feather hat and the spiritual responsibility of making sure the gods don't get cranky. You'd never think that a career built on bean counting would involve quite this much risk of decapitation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far across the empire this dream reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a woven reed mat, with your back aching and your legs already resenting the full day ahead. Smoke drifts lazily from a small incense burner near the doorway, mixing with the scent of corn mash, burnt chili, and damp stone. Outside, the city already hums. Vendors shouting about maize cakes, priests chanting by the temple steps, the clatter of sandals against stone as market couriers sprint by, always late. Your quarters are attached to a tax storehouse just off the main market road. It's a strategic position close enough to the temple to show you matter, far enough that no one mistakes you for someone holy. Your only blessings today will come from a jar of chili paste and maybe, just maybe, a quiet afternoon. Your clothes are stiff with salt from sweat, because laundry day is a myth. Your breakfast, 1 maize flatbread, 2 beans, and the silent prayer that no angry merchant left a curse stone under your door. You check anyway. No curses today, just 2 toads someone painted with symbols and left near your sandals. Classic passive aggression. Outside, the tribute carts arrive. Wooden platforms strapped to the backs of sweating porters, stacked high with bundles of dyed cloth. Obsidian blades, cacao beans tied in cords of 50 because yes, in this world, money is chocolate and no one's complaining. You make notes on an amate paper scroll using ink made from crushed insects and spit. Delicious. You greet the runners from distant towns. Some smile, others pretend not to see you. You nod like a disappointed parent and scribble late again next to their town glyph. They'll either bring more next time or enjoy an unexpected visit from the Flower War recruitment team. Historians still argue whether tribute collectors were deeply respected administrators or just bureaucratic parasites with good hats. You'd say both can be true. The hat is, undeniably, very good, feathered, pointy, and hard to take seriously. Mid-morning heat rolls over the city like a tortilla press. You trudge toward the temple steps with a report scroll under your arm, dodging dogs, small children, and that one street poet who always tries to rhyme taxes with axes. It's a stretch. At the steps, you pause because the stairs are steep, and your dignity has limits. You hand off the scroll to a scribe, nod at the nearest priest, and take the long way back down to avoid slipping and becoming this week's comedy story. You return to your room, now shaded and slightly cooler, only to find a new scroll waiting, a summons from the outer provinces. Supplies are late. Again, you sigh and begin packing sandals, account scrolls, counting beads. And your nicest scowl, because tomorrow you leave the city and trust me, nobody out there wants to see you. The journey begins before sunrise, which is just a poetic way of saying you're cold, cranky, and have been awake since the owls stopped hooting. Your traveling kit is slung over your shoulder woven bag. Spare loincloth, scrolls wrapped in waxed leaves to keep them dry, and enough dried maize cakes to remind you just how little joy food can bring. You head east, down the calzada that stretches from Tenochtitlan like a stone artery. The city's causeways shimmer in the morning mist, and your sandals make that soft slap-slap that says I'm important, but not important enough to ride a litter. Only nobles ride. You walk, with purpose, and blisters. As you pass through the checkpoint arches, the guards wave you through, not because they like you. Tribute collectors are universally hated, but because they don't want to deal with your paperwork. You salute with mock cheer and keep walking into the countryside where tribute turns into rumor. The first village on your list is called Queerwhittle, which loosely translates to where the rain doesn't stop. You arrive muddy, mosquito-bitten, and already regretting everything. The locals greet you with wide eyes and tighter lips. A few elders step forward and bow slightly. You bow back, because respect is the only thing standing between you and a pit trap covered in banana leaves. They bring out their tribute bundles, colorful cloths, tiny turquoise beads, chili strings, a disturbing number of frogs, and you nod gravely as you tally. One child tries to sneak a cacao bean from the stack. You stare. They freeze. You raise a brow. They drop it and run. You smile. Absolute power has its moments. Then comes the whispering. There's talk of a village further south that hasn't delivered in 3 moons. Too busy hiding. Someone says, "Too proud," says another. "Too dead," mutters a third. Historians still argue whether tribute resistance was common or exceptional. You don't care. What matters is if they're not paying. You're the one who gets blamed. You make a note and decide to head there next. That evening, you stay in the guest hut if hut means a thatched roof. 3 chickens, and a pile of itchy mats. You eat spicy stew with something vaguely amphibian in it and try not to think about your soft city cot. A local elder tries to impress you with stories of past sacrifices. You nod politely and wonder how many frogs you'd need to be sacrificed in your honor before your feet stopped hurting. Outside, the jungle hums. Mosquitoes chant their war songs. Somewhere, a jaguar coughs in the distance. You lie on your side, scratching at flea bites and watching the ceiling for falling spiders. This is what they meant by service to the empire. Before sleep takes you, you reach for your scrolls and begin tallying the village's offerings. You double-check your math because the gods don't accept oops as a valid excuse. And if they're not happy, neither is your boss. Also, fun fact in this part of the empire, the tribute quota includes flower garlands. No one's sure why. Historians still debate whether these were decorative, spiritual, or just the world's first HR-mandated morale boosters. Either way, you've got a sack of marigolds and a foot fungus to show for it. One of them smells nice. Morning arrives, not with the chirping of birds, but with the damp realization that something has definitely crawled into your sandal overnight. You shake it loose and try to remember if millipedes are considered sacred. Probably not. Either way, you're up, stretching muscles that feel like they've been tenderized for cooking. Today's mission is risky, the tribute-avoiding village. It's said to be friendly on the surface and knife-sharp underneath. The kind of place that offers you cactus fruit with one hand and hides obsidian in the other. You make your way there with wary optimism, and by that, we mean you walk faster and keep your knife closer. The jungle thickens. You pass abandoned fields, half-built shrines, and a suspiciously overturned canoe. It's quiet, too quiet, which of course is a phrase that always means you're about to walk into trouble. By the time you arrive, the sun is directly overhead, and your sweat has soaked through every layer of your cotton tunic, proof that ancient dry fit was just damp fabric and positive thinking. A few villagers peer at you from their reed homes, and a lone child waves before being yanked backward by an anxious adult. Charming. You announce yourself with the customary greeting, "In the name of the emperor. I come to collect what is owed." There's a pause, a long one. Then a man steps forward. He smiles, wide and toothy, like someone who has definitely stabbed at least one tax official before. They invite you in. What follows is a diplomatic chess game made out of roasted maize, polite lies and vague threats. You sip their pulque, the fermented agave drink that tastes like what regret smells like, and smile through your 4th cup. You mention missed quotas. They mention droughts. You nod at their empty granaries. They nod at your dagger, eventually. A compromise is reached. They'll deliver half the expected tribute, now dried peppers, copper discs, ceremonial paper, and send the rest soon. You record this with ink and a very skeptical eyebrow. Historians still argue whether tribute deals like this were acts of negotiation or low-key rebellion. You're pretty sure it's both. After all, rebellion is just negotiation without eye contact. As the sun lowers, they offer you a place to rest. You decline, politely but firmly. You've seen enough horror stories to know how this ends: a scorpion in your tunic. Or worse, a ritual invitation that turns into a one-way ticket to the underworld. You leave with your pack slightly heavier, your pride slightly dented, and your bladder very full. Because, of course, there are no latrines, just the vast jungle, full of leaves that may or may not cause rashes, and snakes that definitely cause panic. The Aztecs were hygienic by ancient standards, which means they bathed often, usually in rivers filled with fish, mud, and your own anxiety. But as a tribute collector, you've had to master the art of the strategic squat, far from sacred, and always a gamble. There's even a scroll back home about proper outdoor relief etiquette: face the sun, dig a shallow hole, and for the love of Quetzalcoatl, don't look down too fast. It's called the Codex of Regret. Probably. And by nightfall, you make camp just outside the next town, you hang your tribute bag from a branch to avoid ants. Then you lie down, blade close, mind racing, belly churning, and realize something horrifying. You forgot to ask if the dried peppers were counted in bulk or bundles, which means you'll have to go back tomorrow. Morning arrives, not with the chirping of birds, but with the damp realization that something has definitely crawled into your sandal overnight. You shake it loose and try to remember if millipedes are considered sacred. Probably not. Either way, you're up, stretching muscles that feel like they've been tenderized for cooking. Today's mission is risky, the tribute-avoiding village. It's said to be friendly on the surface and knife-sharp underneath. The kind of place that offers you cactus fruit with one hand and hides obsidian in the other. You make your way there with wary optimism, and by that, we mean you walk faster and keep your knife closer. The jungle thickens. You pass abandoned fields, half-built shrines, and a suspiciously overturned canoe. It's quiet, too quiet, which of course is a phrase that always means you're about to walk into trouble. By the time you arrive, the sun is directly overhead, and your sweat has soaked through every layer of your cotton tunic, proof that ancient dry fit was just damp fabric and positive thinking. A few villagers peer at you from their reed homes, and a lone child waves before being yanked backward by an anxious adult. Charming. You announce yourself with the customary greeting: in the name of the emperor, I come to collect what is owed. There's a pause, a long one. Then a man steps forward. He smiles, wide and toothy, like someone who has definitely stabbed at least one tax official before. They invite you in. What follows is a diplomatic chess game made out of roasted maize, polite lies and vague threats. You sip their pulque, the fermented agave drink that tastes like what regret smells like, and smile through your fourth cup. You mention missed quotas. They mention droughts. You nod at their empty granaries. They nod at your dagger, eventually. A compromise is reached. They'll deliver half the expected tribute, now dried peppers, copper discs, ceremonial paper, and send the rest soon. You record this with ink and a very skeptical eyebrow. Historians still argue whether tribute deals like this were acts of negotiation or low-key rebellion. You're pretty sure it's both. After all, rebellion is just negotiation without eye contact. As the sun lowers, they offer you a place to rest. You decline, politely but firmly. You've seen enough horror stories to know how this ends: a scorpion in your tunic. Or worse, a ritual invitation that turns into a one-way ticket to the underworld. You leave with your pack slightly heavier, your pride slightly dented, and your bladder very full. Because, of course, there are no latrines, just the vast jungle, full of leaves that may or may not cause rashes, and snakes that definitely cause panic. The Aztecs were hygienic by ancient standards, which means they bathed often, usually in rivers filled with fish, mud, and your own anxiety. But as a tribute collector, you've had to master the art of the strategic squat, far from sacred, and always a gamble. There's even a scroll back home about proper outdoor relief etiquette: face the sun, dig a shallow hole, and for the love of Quetzalcoatl, don't look down too fast. It's called the Codex of Regret. Probably. And by nightfall, you make camp just outside the next town, you hang your tribute bag from a branch to avoid ants. Then you lie down, blade close, mind racing, belly churning, and realize something horrifying. You forgot to ask if the dried peppers were counted in bulk or bundles, which means you'll have to go back tomorrow. You wake up with a sore neck, an itchy scalp, and the distinct sensation that your life choices have been heavily influenced by poor cartography and too much maize beer. Today, your task is simpler in theory inventory. You're back at the tribute station, logging what you've gathered so far: cacao beans, woven cloaks, feathers from birds that may or may not have been legally hunted. And naturally, more dried peppers than any one empire should logically require. The records are kept on amatil, bark paper covered in bright pictograms that are somehow both charming and deeply judgmental. Each dot, slash, or glyph marks your failures and half-successes. And no, there's no erasing. Your superior, an elderly man whose eyebrows could house entire wasp colonies, reviews your scroll with all the warmth of a rain-soaked jaguar. He grunts, that's all. A single grunt, but it echoes through your bones like a death sentence. Then he points to a missing item: 2 obsidian blades from a mountainous village 5 valleys away. It's your job to collect them, and you'd better do it before the next moon cycle, or the gods won't be the only ones thirsting for blood. You nod, bow, and exit the station like a model employee, one who is deeply considering faking their own death. Again, traveling to this village requires navigating something called the Tlachtli Path, which is Aztec for this trail will destroy your shoes, your soul, and your remaining optimism. The terrain is steep, the bugs are persistent, and the smell of your own body has graduated from forest funk to aromatic crime. Somewhere along the trail, you pass a group of traveling merchants carrying salted fish and complaining about flour war quotas. They don't notice you at first, but when they do, they give the classic side-eye reserved for tax collectors and extremely bad omens. You nod politely and pretend you're just a lost farmer with a clipboard. Scholars still debate whether tribute collectors were seen as civil servants or necessary parasites. Judging by the merchant's expressions, you're leaning heavily toward parasite with a clipboard. You reach the village by sunset. It's smaller than you expected. 1 temple, 1 square, and about 40 huts perched like sleepy lizards on the hillside. The locals are gathered for what appears to be a ceremony involving dancers, conch shell music, and someone wearing more feathers than a hallucinating parrot. You wait respectfully until the rituals finish. Then approach the elder. He greets you with the weary smile of someone who knows how this story usually ends with paperwork. You present your tribute request. He listens, nods, then gestures to 2 obsidian blades tied neatly in reed bundles. No fuss, no haggling. Just one condition: you have to eat with them first. You agree, because that's the rule. Refuse hospitality, and suddenly you're the rude outsider who gets offered to the temple gods as a midweek snack. The meal consists of maize dumplings, squash stew, and a delicacy called Aksayakatl lake flies rolled into crunchy wafers. You chew slowly, trying to decide whether this is delicious or just deeply alarming. Either way, it's protein, and your hosts are watching, so you smile like a well-fed hostage. As night falls, you are offered a sleeping mat and a view of the stars. You decline again politely, as always, and retreat to your travel blanket. You roll up your cloak as a pillow, place the obsidian bundles under your arm, and whisper a short prayer to every god you can remember. The stars are cold tonight, and the wind carries something strange, an almost musical sound, like bone flutes on the breeze. You tell yourself it's just ceremonial echoes. You don't sleep well. The next morning begins with the usual blend of stiff joints, regret, and a mild hangover from ceremonial beverages that tasted suspiciously like fermented cactus and embarrassment. You wash your face in a trickling stream, which may or may not be part of the village's sacred irrigation system either way. It's cold, and you now feel awake enough to make bad decisions with full awareness. You head back toward the capital, navigating the same thorny, ankle-mocking Tlachtli trail with your obsidian blades carefully strapped inside your travel pouch. But about halfway through the jungle foothills, you hear the thing every tribute collector dreads more than paperwork footsteps behind you, and not the casual late-for-market footsteps. These have rhythm, intention, malice. You don't run, not yet. Running is what guilty people do, and you're only guilty of existing in a tax-heavy empire. But you do quicken your pace just enough to appear suspicious. A voice calls out in Nahuatl. You freeze. 3 men step from the trees. They're not bandits, technically. They wear military paint flower war participants on leave. Maybe, but they're also not smiling, which is always a bad sign in a culture where smiling often precedes sacrifice. They demand to inspect your satchel. You oblige, because refusing would put you on the short list for impromptu bloodletting. They see the obsidian blades. One of them whistles. One of them nods. And the third, the tall one with the jaguar pelt sash, simply mutters something you don't catch before slapping you on the back, like an old friend, except his hand stays there a bit too long. Like a warning wrapped in camaraderie. They let you go, but now they know who you are. Historically, tribute collectors weren't armed. You're a civil agent, not a warrior. Some scholars argue the Aztec Empire's tribute routes were among the most efficiently dangerous roads in history. Others suggest tribute collectors were protected by ritual status alone, which is comforting in theory, and useless in a forest full of economically frustrated warriors. You walk faster. By dusk, you've made it to a market town, a blessed stretch of mud brick stalls, flickering torches, and the smell of tamales you're too afraid to trust. You check into a resting hut by bribing a teenager with a half-rotted cacao pod and your last clean tunic. In return, you get a cot stuffed with hay and a communal mosquito net woven from regrets. That night, you dream of obsidian blades morphing into serpents, slithering through your hands and whispering about quotas. The next morning, you arrive back at the tribute station. You're early, which means there's still a line of other collectors, each looking like a survivor of a slightly different disaster. One is missing a sandal. One has bite marks on their collarbone. One is weeping openly over a spilled jar of chili paste. You place your goods meticulously documented, dusted, and rewrapped onto the stone counter. The overseer grunts again, but this time it sounds mildly approving. He nods. You almost cry. But instead, you take your next assignment, rare feathers from high-altitude birds raised in the temples of a mountain province. Easy. Right, you walk out of the office, stare at the sunrise, and mentally prepare to hike uphill for 3 days to steal bird glitter from monks with knives. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat starts. Another flower war skirmish. Maybe, or just a festival. It's always hard to tell here. You climb and climb. And then you climb some more because in the Aztec world, high-status birds didn't live in cozy coops near town. No, they lived on sacred mountaintops, tended by monks who may or may not consider your visit a spiritual insult. 3 days of uphill hiking through terrain, best described as ankle resentment. And you arrive at a monastery, clinging to the cliff like it lost a bet with gravity. You're not just here to collect feathers, you're here to request sacred offerings from men who spend most of their time fasting and praying to gods with skull-themed hobbies. A robed priest meets you at the stone gate. He smells like incense, fermented corn, and passive aggression. You bow. He doesn't. Instead, he asks if your hands are clean. You say yes. Though one finger is bandaged from a cactus-related accident, you'd rather not explain. He gestures toward the aviary, and you step into a room of color so radiant you actually gasp quietly. Because this is a sacred site and you're already on thin spiritual ice. Birds of paradise, quetzals, trogons, each one fluttering through filtered light like living jewelry. You show your tribute slip. The monk nods once and disappears for 30 minutes, during which time you must sit cross-legged on cold stone and reflect on your many flaws. He returns with precisely 3 feathers. 3. For a week's journey and diplomatic peril. You get a handful of plumage, barely enough to decorate a salad. You smile and say thank you. He says nothing, closes the aviary gate, and vanishes again. Historians still argue whether the monk orders in these regions were genuinely cooperative with the tribute system or merely tolerated it under duress. Either way, you get the feeling you're more tolerated than welcomed. As you leave the mountaintop, a bird squawks above your head. You look up too late. It drops a sacred blessing right onto your shoulder. You whisper something not entirely appropriate in Nahuatl. The hike back is harder. Your legs ache. Your sandals are falling apart, and you've resorted to wrapping the left one with twine borrowed from a hut you may or may not have permission to use. You sleep in a hollow tree one night, waking up with an ant parade auditioning across your arm like you're a new route on their map. When you return to the tribute station filthy, sunburnt, and emotionally dehydrated, you once again present your find. This time, the overseer doesn't grunt, he just looks at the feathers, then at you. You call this a delivery, he mutters. You stammer about scarcity, ritual delay, spiritual taxes, and the monk's refusal to part with more. He doesn't blink. He scribbles something on a bark scroll and points to a large box labeled pending review. Your feathers go in there. You go back to your cot. Fun fact, tribute collectors didn't get pensions, medical care, or even job security. You were expected to succeed, and if you didn't, someone else would simply pick up your satchel and hope for better odds. That night, you lie awake staring at the ceiling of woven reeds. You wonder if it's worth it. The power, the proximity to empire, the chance to survive one more moon cycle without being turned into decorative bone. You decide it is. Barely. You dream of maize, not a poetic dream, just fields of maize growing, then vanishing, then reappearing as paperwork. Because now you're not hiking, you're auditing. Tribute isn't all feathers and jade beads. Sometimes it's 42 sacks of dried amaranth. Sometimes it's 10 clay pots filled with honey. Or your current burden, 8 live armadillos stuffed into a woven crate like a spiky, slow-moving surprise party. And somehow, you're the one responsible if any of them escape. You trudge through the Southern Valley, balancing a clipboard of tribute tallies and trying not to think about how many tax collectors throughout history have been quietly stabbed behind granaries. Fun fact, in the Aztec Empire, local village officials were held accountable if they underpaid the central government in tribute. But guess who got blamed first when something went missing on the road? You. Even though you didn't miscount the ducks. Even though you had nothing to do with that accidental fire in the pepper storage hut last week. You're still the one who gets called into the stone office with a torch-lit ceiling and asked, very calmly, whether you respect the emperor's bookkeeping system. You say yes. You say it every time, like a prayer, like a spell. Because the alternative is re-education, which is less about learning and more about sitting in a hole until you remember how to obey. Back to the armadillos, you finally reach the capital outskirts, where a checkpoint guard with a jaguar pelt shoulder cape gives your cart a skeptical once-over. He doesn't like your handwriting, or your sandals, or possibly your entire face. You offer him a strip of dried meat. He accepts it without blinking, tears off a bite and waves you through. Bribery, no. Of course not. This is bonding through informal gratuity, and historians still argue whether it was officially tolerated or just so common nobody dared call it out. Past the gates, the tribute warehouses stretch like stone mountains, dry storage for grain, wet storage for fish sauce, cold storage for corpses, though that's more temple adjacent. You steer your rattling cart to the correct bay. A man in a feathered headdress signs your docket and begins inspecting each item with all the enthusiasm of someone checking expiration dates on spoiled milk. 3 armadillos are acceptable. 2 are clearly underweight. 1 bites him. You offer an apology written on palm fiber. He throws it into a basket labeled unacceptable. Your performance review is going to include phrases like inconsistent lizard management. Eventually, you're dismissed and allowed to return to your lodging, a shared room in a government dormitory, decorated with motivational carvings like Serve and Survive and The God's Watch. Even your lunch break, you eat dinner maize cakes, lukewarm beans, and a few bits of roasted ant that you didn't order but aren't picky enough to decline. You sleep on a mat so thin your bones file complaints to your cartilage. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Different village, different offering, different wildly unpredictable livestock. You wonder if it's all worth it. Then you remember you're not the one being sacrificed at the pyramid. At least, not yet. The rain starts at midnight, of course it does, because you forgot to re-wax your cloak. And this isn't gentle. Poetic rain. This is Aztec monsoon season, a category of water event best described as nature's attempt to turn the entire empire into soup. You wake up damp, cold, and mildly annoyed that your room has transformed into an indoor pond. The thatch roof above you does its best impression of a sieve. Every few seconds, a large drop splashes directly onto your forehead. You tell yourself this is just the god's way of saying good morning. Loudly and repeatedly, you wring out your tunic and head out, squelching down streets now indistinguishable from irrigation canals. The sky is grey-green. Frogs are staging a celebratory concert, and your job today walking, just walking, for 8 hours, through 20 leagues of flooded jungle paths, up winding hills, past steaming cornfields, and into cloud-choked villages where nobody speaks your dialect and everyone thinks your clipboard is some kind of punishment tool. And it is, just not for them. The Aztec climate is famously inconsistent. Dry season dust, storms that exfoliate your soul. Wet season, soaking feet. Trench rot and the constant background music of buzzing mosquitoes trying to inhale you whole. There's no sweet spot, no this weather is lovely, only degrees of soggy despair. The worst part, your sandals. Made of thick leather and optimism. They used to have straps. Now they mostly resemble damp string lashed to flattened squash. They squish with every step, releasing the scent of ancient maize and regret. You slip, you swear internally, of course the gods are listening. You continue, somewhere along the trail. A mudslide blocks your route. You're forced to detour through what used to be a ceremonial garden, but now appears to be a community pool for snakes. You apologize to one. It doesn't seem impressed. By mid-morning, the sun shows up like an angry overseer. The rain halts. Steam rises from every surface like ghosts leaving the earth. Your clothing dries into a crisp crust. You feel like a tortilla left too long on a hot rock. Welcome to the Aztec sauna. It's free and mandatory. You finally reach your destination, a lakeside village known for producing beautiful obsidian mirrors and even more beautiful grudges. They remember your last visit, when you penalized them for under-delivering cacao. Today, the chief greets you with ceremonial formality and passive-aggressive floral arrangements. The marigolds spell out something that might be "we try," or possibly "we tried," inside their council hut. You discuss quotas while trying not to pass out from humidity. They offer you fermented maize drink, which tastes like old fruit arguing with vinegar. You smile, you sip, you pretend it's delicious. One mirror is chipped, another is missing. You record everything. The local priest raises an eyebrow. And suddenly you remember this isn't just about accounting. It's about power. Tribute is politics. Tribute is control. You nod diplomatically and accept a woven basket of fish as extra gratitude. You suspect it contains a message. You trek back through puddles, rain returning just in time to mock you. The frogs resume their concert. The snakes wave, or maybe that's just tail motion. You reach your lodging long after nightfall. Your bed is still wet. The roof is still leaking. But there's a blanket this time woven from dog hair. Sure, but soft enough. You fall asleep to the rhythmic drips of ancient infrastructure, dreaming of obsidian and frogs with clipboards.
It's market day, which sounds festive until you remember you're here to collect tribute, not browse. No flower garlands, no flutes, just scrolls, quotas, and villagers who've mastered the polite scowl. You start at dawn, or what passes for it. Thanks to the thick mountain fog, everything looks like it's been smudged by a careless painter. The ground is slick, and your legs ache from the 2-day journey to this particular outpost. The moment you arrive, the elders gather, their expressions the ceremonial blend of hospitality and resentment. Today's expected tribute: jade fragments, cacao beans, and feathers. Always feathers. Your ledger says 500 Quetzal feathers, but you'd settle for 300 that aren't stuck together with sap and chicken drool. They present the items in bundles, unwrapping them like sacred gifts. The jade is chipped. The cacao smells suspiciously fermented. The feathers are mostly turkey. You raise an eyebrow. The village priest raises both. One of you will win this quiet battle of facial muscles. Eventually, he blinks. You diplomatically suggest a revised delivery schedule, which is tribute collector code for "you better fix this before my boss notices." They nod, but you see the weariness. These are subsistence farmers and artisans, not miracle workers. The empire demands luxury, but the land gives only what it gives. As you log each item, you're joined by a scribe, young, overly enthusiastic and alarmingly interested in your handwriting style. He copies every mark you make, whispering the names of villages under his breath like incantations. He offers to carry your satchel. You let him, not out of generosity, but because your spine is currently attempting a coup. Midday, a dancer passes through the market square, part of a local ritual, apparently. She's dressed in painted reeds and shell jewelry, her steps matching the beat of a two-tone drum. You pause, letting the moment wash over you. For a few minutes, you're not a bureaucrat. You're a witness to something beautiful. Then someone tries to bribe you with fish jerky, and the magic is gone. By late afternoon, your satchel is bursting with recorded complaints, not goods. Your cloak smells like roasted maize and mild defeat. You say your farewells with all the grace of a mildly sarcastic statue and begin the long trek back to the capital. The flower wars loom on the horizon. You hear whispers. New captives needed, quotas increasing, priests sharpening knives. Tribute isn't just about things anymore. It's about people, blood, theater. You're collecting more than goods now. You're feeding a machine. As you pass a field of amaranth waving in the wind, you think of your mother, who once told you that even the gods get bored. Maybe that's why they invented tax collectors. Night falls. Stars scatter across the sky like spilled salt. You reach your resting place, a reed mat under a wooden overhang, barely sheltered from the wind. The scribe hums a lullaby nearby. His voice is soft, out of tune, but oddly comforting. You close your eyes. The tribute is tallied. The feathers are half real. The cacao is moldy. But for tonight, you're alive. And in this empire, that's about as close to success as it gets.
Now, we begin before dawn, on a wind-scraped fjord where everything smells like salt, fish, and extremely confident body odor. The longhouse is still dark, though the fire pit in the center sputters with the last gasp of last night's coals. Your blanket is an itchy wool cloak with more holes than warmth, and the straw beneath you is only slightly drier than a swamp. You roll over to avoid someone's foot in your face unsuccessfully and sit up, eyes crusty, bones creaking like a longship hull. You probably wouldn't think that Vikings had a wake-up call, but trust me when a burly man yells, "Rise or rot" in Old Norse. Your options are limited. You've got a mouth like a sandpit and breath like pickled trout. You reach for your morning ration dried herring on barley flatbread so stiff it could double as roofing. Breakfast is a medieval culinary dare, but calories are calories. You chew. You regret. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lace up your boots more like strappy sacks stitched from goat leather and step outside into the icy slap of the northern morning. The fjord gleams in the distance, and the cold wind instantly shoves itself up your tunic. There's frost on the grass, frost on the oars, and probably frost in your beard if you had one yet. You're surrounded by warriors twice your size and half as interested in hygiene. Some are sharpening axes. Others are just yelling for warmth. Maybe you trudge toward the shore where the longship waits. It's carved with a snarling dragon on the prow, which is mostly decorative unless the enemy is afraid of splinters. You glance at the cargo sacks of dried fish, buckets of salted butter, coils of rope, a few terrified sheep, and one guy trying to remember where he left his helmet. Nobody talks about how cramped Viking society could be. You share the longhouse with 20 sweaty humans and their emotions. Privacy doesn't exist. If someone's sick, you're all sick. If someone snores, you either make peace with it or consider murder. And your sleeping quarters double as your eating space, social hall, and armory. Historians still argue whether Viking mornings involved any spiritual rituals or just loud yelling and aggressive chewing. What is clear, you're awake. You're armed, and your day is just beginning. One last joke before you row. Sure, a Viking walks into a mead hall. Everyone else walks out, because bath day was last week and he missed it. You sling your axe over your back, squint toward the icy fjord, and prepare to do what Vikings do best: pretend this was a good idea. You take your place at the oar, because of course you row. There are no motors, no sails today, and definitely no sympathy. The longship isn't built for comfort. It's a floating wooden bench with ambition. Your hands are already raw from the cold, but they'll soon blister from the effort. Someone shouts the rhythm. 1, 2, row. 1, 2, regret. Every pull sends your lower back into full rebellion. Your thighs are burning, your arms aching, and your mind is running a quiet internal monologue of existential questions like, why do we raid places that are uphill? And how many fish can one person eat before going insane? Rowing is the least glamorous part of Viking life. Which says something, considering everything smells like fermented goat and despair. Still, it's essential. Without this unrelenting cardio session, you don't reach the monastery, the village, or the unfortunate coastal farmstead that's about to learn what Viking hospitality really means. Mainstream fact: Viking longships were marvels of engineering, sleek, fast, and terrifying from a distance. Up close, though, they're damp, noisy, and full of men who treat soap as suspicious sorcery. Scholars still argue whether crews rotated oarsmen to rest, or if they simply embraced suffering as a lifestyle. You glance at the guy next to you. He's missing 2 fingers and still rows like he's late for Ragnarok. A woman across from you wears a helmet that's definitely decorative. It wobbles every time she pulls the oar. You admire the commitment. You pass a flask of mead, technically hydration. Realistically, it's fermented courage and liquid bad decisions. The smell alone could strip paint. But you drink. It numbs the pain, the cold, and the knowledge that you'll be doing this for hours, possibly days. Time has no meaning on the water. Only rowing. Only splinters. And yes, someone did bring a goat. It bleats at random intervals, like a very confused war horn. You're not sure if it's food, a mascot, or the designated entertainment. At this point, it's the most relatable crew member on board. To lighten the mood, one of the rowers starts a chant. It's loud, off-key, and possibly about potatoes. You join in because Viking culture values unity, noise, and the ability to pretend you're not slowly losing feeling in your butt. Eventually, someone spots land. It's a blur on the horizon, and your heart lurches. Not from fear yet, but from the hope that you might get to stand up soon, that you might get to stretch your legs, or, dare you dream, walk like a biped again. Of course, this is just the prelude. You haven't even landed yet, but hey, you've survived the rowing part. Sort of. At least you haven't fallen overboard, which is more than you can say for the guy 3 benches back, who now has to dog paddle while yelling curses in Old Norse. You pull harder. The shore is getting closer. So is your next bad decision. You've made landfall, which sounds heroic until you realize landfall means leaping out of a longship directly into knee-deep mud, slipping on seaweed, and getting slapped in the face by the oar you just dropped. Congratulations. You've stormed a beach like a Viking and twisted your ankle like a toddler chasing a duck. Your reward: immediate logistics. The glorious pillaging will have to wait because first, you get to unload cargo, mostly barrels of fish, crates of dried meat, and why not 1 live pig, currently escaping into the trees. You chase it. You fail. The pig wins. Now comes the reconnaissance. You and a handful of other very tired, very damp warriors creep uphill through brush that has never been cleared, trimmed, or even apologized for. It's the ancient version of parkour, but with more thorns and fewer applause breaks. You are sneaking, allegedly, but your knees are cracking so loudly that birds evacuate ahead of you. The target: a small monastery rumored to contain silver, manuscripts, and probably some poor soul trying to finish a hymn. You crouch in the underbrush, staring at hand-chiseled stone walls that probably took 50 years and several fingers to build. Inside, monks are chanting, peacefully, blissfully unaware they're about to meet the least polite breakfast guests in history. Mainstream historical fact, Viking raids on monasteries like the infamous 793 Lindisfarne raid were partly because monasteries were wealthy, isolated, and had zero armed guards. Soft targets with shiny stuff and no plan B. Perfect. And here's a quirky tidbit: some monks tried to hide their treasures by baking small silver relics into loaves of bread. You now regard all bread with suspicion, as both nutrition and currency. You await the signal, a low grunt, or maybe a goat bleat. Hard to tell anymore. Either way, you charge, hollering at full volume. Because surprise is great, but fear is even better. The monks scatter like pigeons, robes flapping, candles crashing. You skid on the smooth stone floor and immediately lose all dignity. Again. There is no choreography to Viking raiding. It's mostly shouting, slipping, and hoping no one notices your sword is upside down. You manage to grab a few things: a small chest, a brass cup, a bundle of weird-smelling herbs. Someone else finds a large decorative cross and immediately uses it as a back-scratcher. Very spiritual, somewhere during the chaos. You realize you're technically looting a library. You're holding a scroll. It's in Latin. You can't read Latin. You sneeze on it and put it back. Respectful-ish. Historians still argue whether these raids were organized state policy or just freelance havoc. Either way, your job isn't to understand the cultural nuance. Your job is to get the pig, the cup, and the herbs back to the ship without tripping over your own axe. The retreat is loud, muddy, and poorly timed. You shout victory, even though your haul is basically flavored twigs and an angry goose someone thought was exotic. Back at the longship, you collapse on the wooden deck and try to breathe through your nose, which is unfortunately full of pollen and existential dread. The good news: no one died. Yet. The bad news: you still have to row home. You thought rowing out was bad. Rowing back. That's where dreams go to die. Your arms are sore, your knees are bruised, and every plank of the longship feels like it's personally judging your life choices. You'd love to sleep, but there's no sleeping on a Viking raid. There's only drifting semi-conscious between rowing shifts while pretending the goat hasn't started chewing your sleeve. Food is passed around, which sounds nice until you realize it's cold, salted fish again. That's it. Just fish. No bread, no garnish, no love. You chew and try not to think about the fact that your meal could also double as bait. Mainstream historical's fact: Viking longships didn't have kitchens. What they had was fire in a wooden boat, which is generally frowned upon. Most meals were preserved beforehand, dried, salted, or smoked. Delicious if your taste buds are made of leather. You get a sliver of dried reindeer meat as a treat. It's chewy, gamey, and more bark than bite. Someone tries to share a fermented shark snack. You decline, because you're still clinging to the idea of dignity, or at least an intact stomach lining. Fermented shark smells like someone buried socks in vinegar and waited a year. The mead goes around again. Not because it pairs well with fish, nothing does, but because morale is low and the sky is darker than your prospects. You drink, cough, and question why ancient hydration was always synonymous with mild poisoning. As you drift along the coastline, the weather decides to audition for a horror film. Clouds swell, waves grow teeth, and the ship rocks like a seesaw run by gremlins. Rain starts cold, uninvited and immediate. Your fur cloak soaked, your boots swamps, your mood, maritime misery. Quirky tidbit: some Viking sailors wore iron amulets shaped like Thor's hammer during storms, hoping divine protection extended to bad sailing decisions. You grab yours like it's a life vest. It's not. Historians still argue whether Viking navigation was truly advanced, or if they just relied on blind confidence and luck. You're leaning toward luck, given the number of times you've almost hit a rock, or a whale, or a floating barrel that might be a ghost. You're too tired to care. Someone starts singing again. You join, not because it's tuneful, but because screaming sea shanties at the void is the only way to feel human out here. Your voice cracks. You blame the salt air. No one believes you. Eventually, the storm passes like a bad mood. The sea calms. The goat lies down. You see the outline of familiar cliffs ahead. Home, if you can call a smoky village full of shouting men and suspicious broth home. But right now, it sounds perfect. You pull your cloak tighter and let your muscles tremble. You've survived the raid, the loot, the leftovers, and the logistics. You are wet, exhausted, and emotionally compromised but alive. And in Viking terms, that's practically a spa day, back on land. Your legs do this charming thing where they forget how to work. After days of rowing and slipping on seaweed, solid ground feels suspicious. You wobble like a baby moose and try to look proud while stepping directly into a puddle that smells like old cheese and regret. You trudge up the dirt path toward the village with your loot slung across your back. The pig didn't make it. The herbs were mostly weeds. The cross was confiscated by someone with more seniority and a shinier beard. So now you're hauling a wooden spoon and half a bag of stolen oats. Viking retirement plans, strong bones, and low expectations. Mainstream historical fact, Viking raids were often communal enterprises. The loot went to the chieftain first, who then redistributed it after. Of course, taking the best bits. You get a cracked comb and someone's second-hand bronze clasp. Economically thrilling. You're welcomed with the local version of applause, grunts of acknowledgement, and a lukewarm bowl of barley soup. It tastes like sadness and thick water. You eat it anyway. Hunger is the greatest seasoning. Now comes the part no one mentions in the heroic saga's debrief and damage control. Your cloak is moldy. Your boots are shredded. Your shoulder smells like fish and betrayal. You try to wash up at the communal stream, but discover it's already full of laundry, goats, and what might be a dead eel. Quirky tidbit: Vikings believed cleanliness was a sign of self-respect and often bathed once a week. Compared to medieval Europe, that's practically obsessive. But bath meant sitting in a lukewarm wooden tub while everyone gossiped about your elbows. You scrub with a piece of rough cloth and what might be soap or just sand. Historians still argue whether Viking soap was made from lye or simply lies. Either way, your skin now feels exfoliated to the bone, once scrubbed and soup-fed. You collapse into your sleeping space, a straw pile tucked between two crates of dried fish and a ceiling beam with a grudge. No pillow, no blanket. Just a vague sense that you might have a splinter in your ear. Nighttime in the village is its own adventure. Someone's child is crying. A dog is snoring like it's possessed. The wind keeps slapping the thatched roof with rhythmic disdain. You pull your cloak tighter and try to sleep, but your brain insists on replaying every moment of the raid in high-definition stress. Remember the scroll you sneezed on? You do now. You close your eyes. Your body aches. Your nose is sunburnt. But deep down, beneath the bruises, splinters, and fish-scented dreams, you feel something suspiciously like pride. You raided. You returned. And you only lost one boot in the process. You're still not entirely sure what was in that soup. You don't get to rest long. The next morning starts with the sound of someone yelling about pigs again, only this time. They've escaped, or been stolen, or, in a stroke of cosmic comedy, perhaps both. Either way, the sun isn't even up yet, and you're being summoned by a woman with enough authority in her voice to make Thor flinch, because you were on the raid. The village assumes you're now an expert on everything. Repairing the roof, ask the raider. Gathering firewood, raider job. Mediating an argument over who owns a chicken. Congratulations, you're a feathered diplomat now. The hero's welcome is basically unpaid labor with extra chores. You are sent out into the forest with an axe that looks like it survived 2 centuries of marital disputes. You chop wood for kindling while trying to avoid accidentally stepping into a bear's breakfast nook. The sun is high. The bugs are aggressive. And the sweat clings to you like regret. No armor now, just a tunic that scratches like it's woven from disappointment and stinging nettles. Mainstream historical fact, most Viking communities were not constantly raiding. In fact, they spent most of their time farming, crafting, and arguing over land boundaries that nobody could quite remember drawing in the first place. You gather as much firewood as you can carry, then stumble back to the village, where someone's goat has taken a suspicious interest in your socks. You're rewarded for your efforts with the leftover dregs of fermented fish broth. It tastes like betrayal and toothpaste gone wrong. You chew through a dried fish skin while dodging splinters from the communal bench. There is no personal space, only the illusion of it. Your neighbor is peeling an apple with a knife that's probably seen battle. You try not to make eye contact. Trust is a rare currency here, and yours has expired. Quirky tidbit: Vikings used honey not just in mead, but sometimes as a wound dressing. It was antiseptic. It was sticky. It was also occasionally eaten straight from the comb, like some sort of divine crime scene snack. Someone's grandmother gives you a sniff and declares you need more salt in your aura. She throws a handful at your boots. You're not sure if it's a blessing or a passive-aggressive insult. Possibly both. By mid-afternoon, you're helping mend nets for the fishermen. Historians still argue whether all Viking communities relied equally on fishing, or whether some were just more enthusiastic about smelling like ocean ghosts. Either way, the hemp rope carves neat red lines into your fingers, and you wonder what part of your glorious warrior training covered knots and barnacles. Dinner is barley cakes. Again. There's something green in the middle. You eat it anyway. The day winds down with a communal song that no one really knows the words to. A toddler bangs on a drum made of goat skin. An old man hits a flute note so high it could summon Odin. You hum along, half asleep, wondering if your earlobe will ever stop itching from yesterday's helmet rash. You're back on your straw pile now. The sky above is streaked with stars and occasional hints of smoke from the still smoldering village across the fjord. You're sore, sunburnt, and your hands smell like pine, sweat, and soup, but you're home. And tomorrow, there's talk of building a new boat. The boat project begins with a tree, not a plank, not a workshop, not a clean piece of lumber from a friendly merchant. No, an actual tree, standing, alive, smug. You and 3 other unlucky villagers are sent into the woods to select and encourage a proper tree to become the spine of your next longship. Encouragement involves axes, blisters, and deeply personal insults hurled at the bark for not falling faster. Mainstream historical fact: Viking ships were engineering marvels of their time. They used overlapping planks called clinker-built and flexible keels, allowing them to navigate both open sea and shallow rivers. But first, those planks had to come from somewhere, namely your calloused hands. The tree finally crashes down with a sound like thunder and a few bonus squirrels thrown in for good measure. You get sap in your hair. You will never be clean again. Dragging the logs back to the village is its own brand of medieval CrossFit. No carts, just ropes, grunts, and the occasional promise of mead that never materializes. The sun blazes like it's punishing you for something your ancestors did, probably raiding monasteries. Again. At the shipyard red muddy clearing, the local shipwright, who smells faintly of fish and superiority, starts barking orders in a dialect that sounds like someone chewing gravel while humming. You pretend to understand. You nod a lot. Historians still argue whether Viking shipbuilding was a community event or strictly a professional guild matter, judging by how you're now covered in splinters and holding a rudder. The answer is whoever isn't quick enough to hide. You shape planks with a draw knife that looks like it wants to be a weapon again. Your knees ache. Your back is inventing new languages of pain. Someone spills pitch on your only pair of trousers. And now you smell like a campfire in crisis. Quirky tidbit. Vikings sometimes buried their dead in boats. Not symbolic models, real boats. With full-size human remains. Grave goods. And occasionally sacrificed animals. You look down at the half-built hull and wonder if that's foreshadowing or just morbid workplace motivation. By evening, your arms feel like ropes. Your fingers no longer obey simple commands, and the ship resembles a question mark more than a longship. Still, the village gathers to admire the progress. Children chase each other over the framework. A chicken claims the prow as her new throne. You collapse near the fire pit, where the evening meal is being prepared, dried meat rehydrated in questionable water, onions a luxury, and something that might be a beetroot or might be a rock with dreams. A bard appears, every village has one. His stories are long, poetic, and contain at least 3 decapitations, all delivered in the same sleepy tone you're using right now. He sings of Odin, of distant lands, of men so strong they could break an oar in half just to prove they were angry. You try to look impressed, but your eyelids are staging a rebellion. As night deepens, you wander back to your straw. The stars glimmer above like tiny gods watching a comedy. You curl up, pitch-stained, salt-tired, dreaming of a future where the boat sails straight and no one asks you to chop another tree ever again. Spoiler, they will. At some ungodly hour, because time is more of a concept than a comfort, you are woken not by roosters, but by a goat eating your bedding. Again. The village is alive with noise and urgency, which in Viking terms means someone had a dream, and now you're all rowing into destiny. The boat, barely finished, is being pushed into the fjord. You're handed an oar before you remember your arms still belong to yesterday's blisters. There's no training, no warm-up, just row, or the gods will be disappointed. Mainstream historical fact, Viking longships could hold 40 to 60 rowers, and each oar had to move in perfect unison. The coordination was real, the cramps were legendary. You are the weakest link. As the boat slides into the water, you're hit by 2 things, the freezing splash of the fjord, and the realization that no one here knows how long this trip will be. You begin to row. Each stroke is a negotiation between your muscles and the cold. The sea smells like salt and old secrets. Wind bites at your ears. The man in front of you sneezes with terrifying force. You silently promise to punch him later. Your seat is a plank that was probably designed by someone who hated backs. Your legs fall asleep. Your hands blister again. The row rhythm is kept by a man banging a stick on a shield. The stick is also used for motivational wax. It's a multi-tool. Quirky tidbit, Vikings sometimes brought ravens on their voyages. Not for companionship, though, who wouldn't want a goth parrot, but to release them mid-journey. If the bird didn't return, it meant land was ahead. If it did return, well, keep rowing. Loser. The day stretches into a blur of water, clouds, and existential dread. You are now so hungry that even dried fish smells like a Michelin-starred memory. Someone passes around a sack of dried berries and seal fat. You chew it with the enthusiasm of a hostage. Suddenly, the rhythm changes. The leader calls out, "Land." You squint. It looks like a rock. Could be a monastery. Could be a very organized flock of birds. Historians still argue whether every Viking voyage had a specific target, or if some were glorified scouting trips that occasionally found something worth pillaging. Either way, your role isn't strategy. Your role is rower number too many. As the boat nears the coast, the rowers slow. Silence descends. You're told to stay alert, but not speak. Every creak of wood is a song of tension. You can feel the land ahead holding its breath. Or maybe that's you. You beach the ship silently, boots hitting wet sand. You're handed a crude weapon that looks suspiciously like a broken farming tool. You're supposed to stand guard while the others scout ahead. The fog closes in. Somewhere nearby, An owl hoots. You almost jump. A child could take you down with a stale biscuit right now, but you nod like a hardened warrior. Later, you hear a whoop. The scouts return. It was a fishing hamlet, not a fort. They've taken smoked fish, tools, and one very confused goat. You row back in silence, waves slapping the hull like a drumbeat of anticlimax. At camp, someone makes a joke about you being the fearsome goat raider. You smile, sort of, then fall asleep with one eye open because in Viking culture, every calm moment is just a trap with better marketing. Morning arrives with the subtlety of a war horn, and you awaken to the soft sensation of rain dripping through a hole in the thatch directly onto your face. You are, once again, damp, not clean damp. Viking damp, a blend of sea spray, sweat, fish oil, and something you hope is just moss. You roll over and pull your cloak tighter, but the goat from yesterday, yes, still here, decides now is the time to chew your boot. There is no reward ceremony, no feast. Your glorious return is marked with chores and the ceremonial resharpening of tools that, hilariously, dulled themselves on that one time you hit a tree instead of a target. Such is the rhythm of Viking life. Raiding is just the intermission between laundry that never gets truly clean and roofs that never fully stop leaking. Your ribs ache. Your fingers are swollen. But the village needs fixing. So you are sent still soggy, still sore to help patch the fence. The same fence that broke last month, from wind or ghosts. Or just because ancient Norse carpentry had confidence issues. Mainstream historical fact, Viking communities were self-sustaining, and raids were only part of the larger social order. Most of the time, people farmed, crafted, or repaired things, like fences, over and over again. While you hammer with the enthusiasm of someone who knows the wood will rebel again by Thursday. Your mind drifts, not to the loot or the screaming or the smoke, but to that weird owl you saw. Or maybe it was a falcon. Either way, it judged you. You're called away to help prepare for the blot, a sacrificial feast to thank the gods. You're not important enough to actually offer anything, but you do get to stir the stew. It's mostly barley, onions, and a very assertive goat smell. You are, once again, both hungry and afraid. Quirky tidbits, some Viking feasts included horse meat, fermented fish, and a dish called blood pudding. Think sausage, but replace flavor with fear. And yes, the goat is still watching you. You eat. You nod when spoken to. You drink something that tastes like regret in a wooden cup. You try to laugh at the jokes about the goat. And for a second, just one, you're almost warm. Historians still argue whether Viking raids were driven more by economic need or elite posturing. But from your current view, staring into a bowl of suspicious meat while wearing damp wool that smells like 40-year-old leather, it feels less like glory, more like surviving. Later that night, the fire burns low and the laughter fades. You lie back, staring at the smoke curling through the beams. The wind howls outside, and someone nearby snores like they're reenacting a thunderstorm. You remember the waves, the sky, that terrifying sprint through seaweed. And you wonder, not for the first time, if you'll ever be clean again. You probably won't. But hey, you're alive. For now.